Okay, are we ready to go? Very good. Well, welcome everybody to our event tonight. I'm Randy Kluver. If I haven't met you personally, it's my privilege to serve as the Associate Provost and Dean of OSU Global and the School of Global Studies at Oklahoma State University. And as you know, we conduct these global briefing series a couple of times each semester. The purpose of this event is really to bring interesting speakers from around the nation who can help us better understand the world that we live in. Tonight it's an immense privilege to host Dr. Diya Abdo. As many of you know, we've had this Afghan thing going on here for about a year, helping to work to resettle Afghan evacuees, and it's been an amazing experience. But soon after that project was announced, I got an email from Diya saying, "Hey, I hear what you're doing at Oklahoma State. You know, we actually have this thing called ECAR, Every Campus A Refuge, that is a resource to universities doing that." And since that time, since Diya reached out to us, she's just been an invaluable help in helping us to understand what we're doing, helping us to think through our structures, helping us to think through our processes. And so we invited Diya to repay, in a sense, the immense help that she's given us here at Oklahoma State. Just a little bit, you all have probably seen her bio, so I don't need to give you too much, but Dr. Abdo is the Lincoln Financial Professor of English at Guilford College, and she might talk about how she gets from English to refugee resettlement. It's kind of an interesting story. I do want to mention her book, American Refuge. I apologize that we didn't think I had far enough to have some copies here for you to purchase tonight, but it is a fantastic book. I really recommend that you take a look at it. In 2015, Diya founded this organization called Every Campus A Refuge, which, with the goal of helping universities across the nation really mobilize their resources to become a resource for displaced persons and refugees. And so it's just a terrific vision, and she's having an amazing impact. So please help me in welcoming Dr. Diya Abdo.
Thanks, everybody. Do I need to use the microphone, or can you hear me? Okay. If at any point you need me to speak up, if you can just gesture, and I can use the mic if needed. It's such an honor to be here. I have been talking to Randy for the last, I think it's been since, I want to say September 2021. So it's been a year and a half, and I've been so inspired by the work that you are all doing here. I'm not a very religious person, but when I hear the work that is happening here, I feel like it's truly the work of community and the work of radical hospitality. One of the things that I've said frequently about ECAR is that Every Campus A Refuge as an idea was inspired by Pope Francis, who in 2015 called on every parish in Europe to host a refugee family, calling on small communities to do the work of welcome and radical hospitality. And colleges and universities are perfect places of welcome. They are small communities with incredible resources to do that kind of work, to host refugees on campus grounds and support them in their resettlement. So is it okay? Can you get rid of that one? Yes, wonderful. And I can, yeah. There you go. Wonderful, thank you. So the title of my talk today is The Global Refugee Crisis and What It Means for Us. We're going to start by sort of a 30,000 feet look at what's happening in the world in terms of forced displacement, and then zoom in to what it means for us here in the United States. Sorry. And then zoom in even more to, yeah, I know, water. To see what you all are doing here at Oklahoma State University, which I think is a role model for other universities across the country invested in supporting their local communities. I want to start off by reading from this book, American Refuge. American Refuge, True Stories of the Refugee Experience, is based on the stories of several refugees who were hosted on Guilford College's campus. So since 2015, we have been hosting refugees on Guilford's campus. They've come from all over the world, from Uganda, from the DRC, from Central African Republic, from Venezuela, from Ecuador, and from Iraq. We've also hosted families from Syria, from the Sudan. So it really has been an international effort, and we've really welcomed people from all over the world. In the late 2000s, Ali worked a very brief time for an American company that provided maintenance for Iraqi vehicles. He typeset schedules, created stamps, and designed business cards. He didn't last long in this job. People working with such companies, even if marginally, were constantly threatened and attacked. Ali, marginally, survived 2 assassination attempts. The first time, he had been on his way to work while Marwa, his wife, and their children slept soundly at her parents' home. He casually walked past a fridge on the street on his usual route to his parked car. He absent-mindedly noted its presence without surprise. There was always litter, even that big, on the streets of Baghdad in those days, the city always disemboweling itself. The bomb left for him in a fridge exploded behind him when he was just a few meters ahead. Had it exploded sooner, had he been closer, he would have been killed. But he was just out of bounds for death. He heard the explosion first and then felt a stinging heat slurp at his back. Shrapnel from the fridge fiercely kissed him in his head and bottom. He spent days in the hospital. They removed what they could of the shrapnel, the pieces visibly sticking out, and deflated the hot air caught in his lungs, suffocating him. To do so, they had to insert a tube through his side to let out the air as if he were an overblown balloon. The second time, he had been on his way back from work. The first assassination attempt had made him constantly vigilant, suspicious, on the alert about who was in the street with him, behind him, ahead of him, who was walking where and how far away from him. It was this hypervigilance that saved him. On this relatively quiet road, he immediately noticed the car behind him, driving too fast, as if hell-bent on getting something done and out of the way. As soon as he turned to look at the car, he saw the driver stick out his hand, and Ali instantly dove. Had he been a few seconds too late in his reaction, he would have been killed. Had his fear not consumed him, he would not have turned just in time to see the hand, to see the gun, just in time to dive, just in time for the bullet to catch him in the leg and not the chest. Bleeding and in pain, Ali called his brothers to take him home. The spot where the bullet hit him is gnarly and fleshy now because he was too scared to go to the hospital where he believed he would be exposing himself to more attacks. And so he treated himself at home. The gnarly flesh slowly healed, gnarly and fleshy. And then Ali quit that job. People become refugees because they have to leave their homes. They're forced to leave. Ali is an example of that. Ali's story is an illustration of the persecution, the threats, the conflicts, the attacks that force people to leave homes they love, to leave their souls behind. The global forced displacement population, as you can see, is staggering in its numbers, right? There's almost 100 million people who are forcibly displaced. Many of them, millions, are asylum seekers. There are currently 27 million refugees designated as refugees, right? These are all words that we use interchangeably, but they actually mean different things. So the term refugee, or the term internally displaced, or the term migrant, or the term immigrant, or the term stateless, or the term asylum seeker. These are all different definitions that can be truly dehumanizing, and so it's really important to know when we're using those terms and for what purpose. Another staggering statistic is that children account for a large population of those forcibly displaced. They are 41% of all forcibly displaced people. As you can see here, these numbers are constantly being updated by the UNHCR. And among all of these forcibly displaced, as I said, we use these terms interchangeably, but the term refugee is a very specific legal status. There are, as I said, 27 million refugees in the world today designated by the UNHCR as refugees, and this is the definition of a refugee that was created in 1951, really as a response to the mass exodus of World War II. A refugee is someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. In Ali's particular case, he is a refugee, but also sometimes referred to as special immigrant visa. And so because of his membership in a particular social group, in other words, someone who has worked with the US military and that position causing him to be in danger, he was able to apply and receive refugee status and come to the United States to resettle with his family. Now, UNHCR has identified 3 durable solutions for refugees, right? The 27 million refugees. We're not talking about these 100 million displaced individuals, but the 27 million refugees who have refugee status. The UNHCR has worked to find solutions for their displacement. Voluntary repatriation is one of them. That means being able to return to one's home country. It's the best solution, but it is the hardest solution because it's only an option if refugees can return safely to their country of origin. It's not something that can be forced on individuals. It has to be a choice. Another is local integration. Many refugees end up crossing a border and living in a country next door for decades. And one of the things that happens is that they could potentially integrate into that local community. It allows refugees to remain in the country that they fled to and become citizens of that country. The third option is resettlement, which is what happens when refugees come to our country here, the United States. And it's when refugees move from that second country, where generally they might have been living as urban refugees or in refugee camps, and they come to a country that has agreed to grant them rights and access and citizenship. I want to read another section from American Refuge that really illustrates how hard it is for refugees to actually achieve any of these durable solutions. One does not always become a refugee. Many times, one is born a refugee. That's because many refugees live, as I said, in protracted displacement, which means that they live for generations in refugee camps. Sometimes their children and their grandchildren are born into those refugee camps. And in Riri's case, she was one of them. Riri was born a refugee in Thailand's Tam Hin camp. Her parents fled Burma in 1997, the year Tam Hin was founded, built for people just like them, sprung up to receive them. She's a year younger than that camp, born just as her parents got there. Their journey out of Burma was long and meandering. One of her older sisters, her mother was in the early days of pregnancy with her when they fled their village in Burma, was born in the jungle during the family's long flight. 2 more girls were born in the camp. The last sister, 13 now, was born in the US. When the Burmese soldiers attacked their village, they burned everything down to ashes, including her parents' marriage certificate and family photos. When her family left, they took nothing with them except the baby in their arms and the one in her mother's belly. During the day, they hid and slept, and at night, they walked. It was on one of those nights that her sister was born, months after they started their journey. By the time they got to the camp, her mother had another child in her belly, Riri. In the camp, the family initially slept on the dirt ground inside bambooed walls and plastic tarped houses with logs for corners, something resembling a foundation. But over time, her parents, who were good at designing cut-down bamboo, made their house into a plastic tarped castle with 2 stories and a balcony. And her parents worked hard. Her mother never kept her hair long, even though long hair was prized, a sign of beauty. What use had she for long hair? It was always too hot anyway, and she couldn't do much or work as hard as she needed to with all that heaviness on her head. At camp, Riri went to school like all the other children. Their efforts were put on display for all to see, their successes and their failures. Life's expectations, the rituals of pride and shame, the daily concerns that mark everyday existence, transpose themselves to camp life. For life in the camp doesn't know any better. It doesn't pause to marvel at its own strangeness, doesn't falter to wallow in its own existential absurdity. Camp life sticks to its story that life in here is just like life out there. What matters out there matters in here too. In short, life goes on. At Tam Hin, education was a matter of public concern. The logic of life there rejected the supposed temporariness, the emergency of camp life, and said simply, this is normal life, and here we do normal things. Riri lived for several years in that refugee camp. When she left, they left family members behind, and they left school teachers behind, and school friends behind who are still living in refugee camp. And so this life of protracted displacement is really part of the current practice. So even though the UNHCR has identified these 3 durable solutions that allow for access, allow for rights, allow for opportunity, allow for integration, what happens to most refugees is either de facto integration, which means that you're living as a refugee, but you are forced to integrate into the local community. You're effectively stateless. You find different ways to work to make ends meet, to support your family, but you have no documents. Or protracted refugee situations, which is when a group of refugees, 25,000 or more from the same population, live for more than 5 years in the same refugee camp. I'm Palestinian. My parents were displaced from Palestine to Jordan in 1967. We were very lucky in the sense that in Jordan, we were able to achieve local integration and became Jordanian citizens. Other family members who fled and ended up in Syria or ended up in Lebanon experienced de facto integration. They continue to live in refugee camps. They continue to be stateless. They have to work under the table. It's challenging for them to go anywhere and to be able to pursue opportunities. It's the same for their children. The staggering figure is that out of the 27 million refugees, again, these are folks who are designated as eligible for resettlement. So there's 100 million displaced people. 27 million of them are eligible for resettlement. Less than 1% of those will ever resettle. Less than 1% will ever achieve the opportunities that we think of and know of when one becomes a citizen. Of course, the war in Ukraine has driven those numbers up quite significantly, the highest since World War II. These are the countries that are major sources of forcibly displaced peoples. And these are the countries that are currently hosting the largest number of refugees, not necessarily in resettlement, right, but in refugee camps, a kind of de facto integration or temporary situations that become protracted. Even though forced displacement has been around for a long time. So people have moved for opportunity, they've moved because of conflict, they've moved because of war, they've moved because of persecution. Support for refugees and legal protections for refugees is a fairly recent phenomenon. So as you can see, 1921, the League of Nations, moving through 1950, 1951. And so these are all various agencies that were created, various protocols, various policies, various offices to support and protect refugees and try to achieve these more humane solutions. In 2016, there was the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants that was adopted by all member states. And it really signified a sort of a renewed commitment to refugees, the respect for human rights of refugees. In 2016, under this declaration, it was agreed that they would draft 2 global compacts for refugees and migrants that also introduced the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework. This particular global compact on refugees really emerged after extensive consultation, and it is a way to affirm and recognize the sustainable, humane solutions for refugees that need to include all of us, definitely the international community and governments, and provides governments with a blueprint to be able to ensure support for refugees who cross their borders and come to their shores. The key objectives of the Global Compact on Refugees is first to ease the pressure on host countries. As you can imagine, countries like Jordan and Turkey, significantly under-resourced, are taking in quite a few refugees in a way that is not sustainable. Support refugee self-reliance. Support conditions for return and repatriation. And expand access to third country resettlement. As I said, less than 1% of refugees will ever resettle, and that's an abysmal number, considering how many countries there are around the world that could potentially participate in refugee resettlement. Even though the United States has generally not taken any more than 150,000 refugees at its height, and I'll mention that in a little bit, we are, in fact, one of the world leaders in refugee resettlement. The U.S. is a leader in refugee resettlement, even though the numbers are insignificant compared to the millions that we're talking about. When you think about the future, we can't, of course, not think about what the climate is doing in terms of forced displacement. So the UNHCR has released a lot of figures and reports about folks who are displaced because of weather-related issues, climate change. Most recently, the earthquake that happened, sort of natural disasters that cause people to flee. Of course, what happened in Turkey affected Syrian refugees already there who had fled Syria and were living in Turkey. But the projection is that by 2050, there will be 1.2 billion climate refugees. These are folks who are leaving because of weather-related conditions. What's challenging about climate refugees is that they are currently not recognized, as you saw under the UNHCR definition, of why one can be eligible for resettlement, right? So climate is not one of the reasons. It's race, ethnicity, nationality, belong to a social group or a political opinion. But what's been positive is that climate is being more and more recognized as a reason for understanding forced displacement and offering protection to forcibly displaced individuals who are displaced because of the climate. Another important thing to consider is that for the longest time, refugees have been cast in the media, certainly in our public discourses and narratives, in very dehumanizing ways. Think about the language that we use sometimes to describe refugees as waves, as floods, right? We think of them, imagine them, see them as a threat that will overwhelm us. And those languages really have an impact, those words have an impact on how we understand and how we see individual human beings who are seeking safety and security. So it's really important when thinking about refugees not to think just of the impact of the refugees on us, what it means for us to receive refugees, or what it means in terms of movement of one place to another, but to also think about the causes of forced displacement, because then we can tackle those drivers of forced displacement. So for example, poverty is a key driver for people's desire to move from one place to another. Conflict is another important driver. Natural disasters, seeking access to education and employment and opportunities. And so thinking very mindfully, intersectionally about how the international community and how the world can address the reasons or tackle the drivers of forced displacement is really key in tackling the refugee crisis. So what does this mean for us here in the United States, and certainly here in Oklahoma and at Oklahoma State University? I want to read another story. This is also from Riri's story. This is when they left their camp in Burma. Riri's father just wanted to go back to Burma so that if his back broke, it would be from working on his own land. At Tam Hin camp, he worked very hard cutting down bamboo. Not illegally chopping down bamboo to survive in temporary countries that could never be his, that were not even a country, always on the margins of made-up places and spaces that sprouted up and entrenched themselves like shrapnel. So that if his legs needed warming by the fire and he needed to gently lift up his teku, it would be around his family, the siblings he left behind in Burma, and those still displaced in Thailand without citizenship. But there was no going back to Burma. On the day Riri's family received notice of their resettlement, her father sent a letter with others traveling through to his scattered siblings. His letter was a simple message. It said, "We leave September 5th. On September 5th, 2006, so that's 10 years after they arrived at the camp, as instructed by UNHCR, they waited at the soccer field by the camp with whatever they could carry. The field was a sea of people, the second cohort of Burmese refugees from the camp to resettle in the US. Riri was excited to get on the bus until she saw her mother cry. At first, she couldn't understand why, but then it dawned on her as the bus passed the multitudes, the faces she knew and loved, and then crossed the river, and the faces were gone, gone now, gone forever. I will never see those people ever again, Riri realized. The man who comforted her during her incessant crying, the teacher who tortured her, the woman who arrived early at the watering hole and hoarded all the water, the friends she scampered with, all in their underwear when it thundered and stormed, to play under the rain and in the mud. They would run to the church, its gutters funneling the rain, hard and forceful, its pressure delightful on their small heads. On the bus, she tried hard to remember because she wanted to make sure she could capture it all, the sound of the rain heavy and hard, the specter of her companion's giggles, and the splashing in the beating shower, followed her all the way to Bangkok. In Bangkok, Riri's family spent the night at a hotel. It was Riri's first time using a Western toilet and sleeping in a bed. Early the next day, the bus took their entire cohort to the airport. This large tribe of 15 families, nearly 100 people, got together on the same large plane to China. On the plane, Riri didn't suffer from the motion sickness that struck the other Karenni families. While living at the camp, she and her family would sneak out to visit her mother and father's siblings who were scattered in different provinces all over Thailand. They would hop on an uncle's moped for a day of family fun in the city he lived in. This forbidden excursion happened only once or twice a year, but it was enough, those rides on the mopeds, on city buses and taxis, to prepare Riri and her family for the plane ride. She watched in fear as everyone else spilled their guts, retched and retching. Their lives in the camps had kept them stationary, not used to any movement. And now a transit of such length, such sweeping change, disoriented and racked their newly moving bodies. In China, the families were separated into smaller cohorts to get on another set of large planes that would take them to their final destinations of resettlement: Australia, America, Europe. The American cohort landed in Chicago, where the families bonded by war, by camp life, and now by a journey to the unknown, compared boarding passes. They were different from one another. Their cohort dwindled again, their built-up tribe fractured. The force of their large sea, their large body of water, atomized into tiny droplets all over the globe. Unlike the departure on the bus, Riri realized that she would also never see these people again. Riri's family were the only ones to get on their small plane heading to South Carolina, where they would live for a short while. The rest of the families went their separate ways to board flights that took them elsewhere. Riri ended up eventually in North Carolina on Guilford College's campus. But that's often how it happens. We were talking earlier about refugees resettling. When refugees come to resettle in the United States, they don't often know where they're going to end up. People who end up on Guilford College's campus tell me that they Google Greensboro when they get to Chicago, or when they get to, an airport in Washington, or when they get to JFK. When we welcomed the first Syrian family that we hosted on Guilford's campus, we were there at the airport to welcome the mother and father and their son. And the moment the mother saw us, she started crying. And then I asked her later why, and she said, "I was so happy to see somebody welcome me. I had no idea where we were going, who was going to welcome us. We thought we were going to be living in caravans." And so there is really not always a lot of knowledge or understanding about what it means to be coming to this country. I want to give you a sort of a brief timeline of what resettlement has meant for us here in the United States. So the 1951 Geneva Convention really establishes the UNHCR, which is how we understand, process refugees and their experience, especially for resettlement. Between 1951 and 1980, we welcome in this country a little over 1 million refugees through a variety of acts. But then in 1980, the Refugee Act is passed. And recently, you've heard about this boldest innovation in refugee resettlement since the Act of 1980, which is Welcome Corps, an opportunity for everyday Americans to sponsor refugees directly. But for the longest time, until this year, what we had was US RAP, the US Resettlement and Reception Program. And what that means, it's a federal program that has, since 1980, welcomed more than 3 million refugees. We have really oscillated in the number of refugees we've welcomed every year. And I'll talk a little bit about how that process comes about. But the highest numbers of refugee admissions were in 1980, 81, 89 to 95, 2008, 2016. I know that you recognize some of those dates and understand why there were high numbers and why 2018, 2020 might have been low numbers. But interestingly, the high numbers and the low numbers have been under both Republican and Democratic administrations. So for a while, refugee resettlement and refugee admissions has not been necessarily a polarized or polarizing issue. Since 1981, we've never gone above 150,000 admissions. Again, I want you to imagine 27 million refugees. 150,000 is the highest. And again, that really places us ahead in terms of the leaders of resettlement across the globe. The top 5 states that receive refugees are Texas, California, New York, Michigan, and Arizona. I'm very proud of North Carolina, which is number 2 on the eastern seaboard. And the top 5 countries that we receive here are from Myanmar, Iraq, Bhutan, Congo, and Somalia. So how is it that we welcome refugees? It is really a very complex process, but each year the president makes a determination about how many refugees we're going to admit that year. And one of the things that we were talking about earlier with the refugee state coordinator is that that number is really always aspirational. So we say 150,000, that doesn't mean 150,000 come. We say 125, that doesn't mean 125,000 come. Oftentimes there are a lot of things that prevent people from ultimately coming here. Capacity is an issue, of course. But every year the president makes a determination about how many refugees and from which countries. And in order to get at this determination, the president consults with Congress and other stakeholders, depending on the president, of course, and who they want to consult. And this consultation really tries to take into account what's happening in the world, right? The humanitarian needs on the international scene. So when we say the humanitarian needs, really what we're looking at are conflicts and crises around the world. So we might determine that in the 1980s, in the 70s, that's Vietnam, and then throughout just in the past year, obviously Afghanistan and then Ukraine. It really determines a role in who we want to support, who we want to bring in, and what the numbers are. Another thing that we take into account, or the president takes into account, is nationals who have a relationship with the U.S. in a way that places them in jeopardy. Remember Ali's story at the beginning? So interpreters, translators, or folks who work with the U.S. military, that really opens them up for retaliation in their own countries. Those are folks who can apply for the SIV that I mentioned earlier. So Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq are examples of that. And of course, we admit folks who have been very, very carefully vetted. The refugee vetting process is arduous. It's exhaustive. It's exhausting. It takes a very long time to ensure that folks are cleared for admission before they come to the United States. I want to read to you an example of that vetting process. Apologies, let me just find Now, safely in Burundi, Blaise applied for refugee status with the Burundian government. Blaise was only 13, and as a minor, his case was included in his sister and brother-in-law's as he was considered part of their family. His brother-in-law and sister, the representatives of the family's case, told their story of persecution to the Burundian government. And then they told it again and again and again to the UNHCR, to the Refugee Resettlement Agency, to the IOM. Blaise thinks frequently about this part of his refugee journey. The officials, the interviewers who walked into the room, the first time they brought with them empty sheets of paper that left the room filled with Blaise's set-down story. After that, in every subsequent interview, the officials, the interviewers, brought with them those papers, the no longer empty but filled papers, where he first spoke his pain out loud, shortly after the harrowing escape from the barrel of a gun against his lowered head, so low because he was kneeling, and from the muddy waters of the river, so muddied with hungry hippos and clamping crocodiles. Blaise had to make an escape across a very dangerous river with his family. There it is, that story. They would ask him questions, and they were expecting to read exactly, word for word, in his spoken answers, the story that he had already set down when he was 13. In the process of becoming a bona fide refugee, the set down story becomes the person. And the person has to be a faithful representation, narration of that set down story. The interviewers tried to trip him up, to test him, to push him to make a mistake so that he would deviate from his set down story. Blaise was initially interviewed when he was 13 years old. The gunpowder and the muddied water scent had barely left his nostrils. He believes that while the interviewers knew that he might not remember all the important details, he couldn't name certain streets, addresses, or certain places, he was too young to know how to lie about the important details, the facts of the case that brought them here, what they had witnessed that made them run for their lives. They needed him to corroborate, or not, his sister and brother-in-law's version of events. When they interviewed him again at 30, it had taken 17 years for his case to be processed. He was still a clear reflection of that set-down story. Unlike other children who live non-refugee lives, Blaise's mind was not allowed to forget, not allowed to protect him from the pain. Its trauma was written both in invisible ink on his body and in legible handwriting on the paper, that one the interviewer was holding in his hand with a set-down story on it. His sister and brother-in-law's nightly drills, playing the role of the UNHCR officer, testing, pushing, tripping him up, all of it made sure that he would never forget. I think this was good, Diya, he tells me. I couldn't see how. Neither could he at the time, but now he does. It taught me how to tell my story. This is what's known as the refugee status determination process, when various agencies determine whether you're eligible for asylum, eligible for refugee status. And that process is incredibly invasive. It's incredibly intensive. As you can see, it's background checks, it's interview after interview. It's often ongoing. It could take many, many years. It's re-traumatizing. So Blaise, as a 13-year-old, I'm sure wanted to forget what happened to him, but couldn't, because every time he had to go back for an interview that reminded him of what happened. It's oftentimes carried by government officials that might not have sufficient training necessarily, and there isn't necessarily oversight of those interviews. And unfortunately, as you can imagine, a lot of processes, sometimes it's up to the individual officer or agent to decide the fate of that prospective refugee. So let's say you make it through this incredibly arduous process. One of the stories that I talk about here is Cheps. And Cheps is the first guest that we hosted on Guilford's campus. Cheps is a gay man from Uganda, and he received refugee status based on his LGBTQ status. And Cheps made it through those interviews as much as he could with his dignity intact. He has a friend who still lives in Kakuma, a camp in Kenya where they both lived, because his friend has a hard time in the interviews talking about his private life. Marcel, his friend, says that every time he goes back, he hopes that maybe he'll have someone older interview him. Maybe it'll be someone from the LGBTQ community who can understand what he's going through. But Cheps made it. Blaise made it. The folks that come to resettle in Oklahoma and elsewhere have made it through that vetting process. They're interviewed, they're screened, they receive additional medical screenings, additional security screenings, and then they receive their travel arrangements that tell them where they're going to go, the boarding passes that take them from one country to another, until they finally arrive in the United States. When refugees arrive here, they are coming to resettle. And resettlement is really an organized form of support that allows refugees, should allow them to integrate, right? It's an organized form of support that allows refugees to integrate and to achieve a pathway to citizenship. They receive support from their local resettlement agencies under this program, USRAP, as well as the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Earlier today, we met our refugee state coordinator here in Oklahoma, who's lovely. But refugees receive the following benefits: case management and core service support for 90 days. They might receive other benefits after the 90 days. They receive health insurance, work authorization, a social security number. They receive a one-time stipend of $1,200. It's the same stipend that you get in Oklahoma that you do in California. It's like that one-time stipend that you receive doesn't matter where you're going. And refugees can apply for residency. They're eligible, obviously, immediately for the green card, but they get it a year in and it's backdated, and then they apply for citizenship 5 years later. But refugees are also expected to achieve certain things and to do certain things. So one of the things that refugees are expected to do is to pay back the plane ticket that brings them to this country. Sometimes it's incredibly challenging when you're like a 10-member family or an 11-member family. They have to pay it over time. But sometimes that means really, a debt of a few $1,000s that the family has and know that they have and that they have to pay back. Refugees are also, under the current USRAP program, expected to achieve self-sufficiency within 90 days. Yeah, I can't achieve self-sufficiency ever. So achieving self-sufficiency after the traumatic experiences that we've been talking about, after the vetting process, after the trip, after the conflict, after the reason that you become a refugee is already sort of traumatic and painful. Self-sufficiency means that you are able to provide for yourself and your family independently and without support from anyone. So really, self-sufficiency here means economic self-sufficiency. But that doesn't mean integration. Economic self-sufficiency does not mean integration. What does integration mean? It means that you are able to access resources and opportunities and rights and tools, that you can become a citizen, right? That you are able to use the language such that you can pursue education or employment or ask your landlord to fix something for you, right? Or be able to take a driver's exam so that you can get your driver's license. Integration means a standard of living that's comparable to locals. It means agency and self-reliance. That, again, doesn't necessarily mean self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency, economic self-sufficiency, does not necessarily mean agency and self-reliance. It does not mean a standard of living that is comparable to locals. And so really the focus in refugee resettlement should be on achieving integration and not just self-sufficiency. I like to talk about this because, we've come a long way in the way that we've talked about refugee experiences. In the past, sometimes we would say assimilation instead of integration. And assimilation is understood now to be a way in which refugees kind of blend in to the community. They become like the community that they join. It's an expectation to lose particular cultural or ethnic differences. But really, integration is not assimilation. Refugees should experience in integration inclusion, belonging, and deep belonging. So feeling welcomed as they are all the time. There are a lot of important factors that affect the outcomes for integration for refugees. Time is one of them. So certainly not having enough time to learn English, not having enough time to figure out, where you want to live, not having enough time to orient yourself, to be able to understand the systems, the really challenging systems that we're navigating here, even as locals, does not allow for successful integration. The ability to pursue education, be able to move in the world and get a degree or recertify or, upskill. Health is a key piece, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but physical and mental health really affects integration. Refugees experience worse physical and mental health than most other immigrants because of their experiences of trauma. Funding. So when the stipend is so limited to $1,200, that means that there really isn't enough funding to support having enough time to successfully integrate. Employment. When you don't have the funding and you don't have the time, what happens is typically quick underemployment, right? So refugees are expected to take the first job that they're offered. That's how you make enough money to pay for your rent. But typically what that means, the first job that you're offered is very rarely commensurate with your skills, with your degrees, with your education, with your passion, your interests. And again, there isn't enough funding and time to be able to pursue a different kind of recertification or education so that you can pursue other kinds of employment. Housing is a key piece. When refugees arrive, they still don't have their social security numbers, and they have a very limited stipend, which means that they can't necessarily afford particular kinds of housing that are safe. And so that's why providing housing on a college campus can be such a huge deal for refugees arriving to a location, and they're still trying to figure things out. Community support is essential in building that sense of inclusion and belonging. Intercultural connections, so connecting with other groups other than their own, other than refugees, and certainly from different cultures and different backgrounds, is really crucial. And then, of course, supportive programming. So ELA, 5 minutes, okay. That went by fast. So the refugee trauma experience, as I mentioned, refugees really experience trauma because they've suffered traumatic experiences, but also the children of refugees experience residual and generational trauma. And the way that manifests is worse physical and mental health. In working with refugees, it's really important to acknowledge these traumatic experiences by minimizing re-traumatization, by emphasizing safety, especially in certain situations or conditions, making sure that people feel physically, psychologically, emotionally safe, and to create opportunities for refugees to build a sense of control and empowerment. Integration is a two-way street. It affects us as much as it affects refugees. Refugees bring a great deal in terms of diversity, in terms of allowing us to build community and connections with each other, their talents, their skills, and they're huge drivers of economic prosperity. I love these figures. In 2015, refugees contributed more than $20 billion in taxes and more than had spending power of more than $56 billion. Resettlement, as I said, typically happens where there are resettlement agencies, but universities are stepping up to do the work of resettlement support. This is a quick typology of how universities are doing that: service learning, supporting scholars. What I'm advocating for is a resettlement campus, a campus that provides integration support to refugees by providing housing, community, access to resources, utilities, and amenities. I love showing this map because it shows this is where resettlement can happen if we actually leverage universities. It's such a bigger, broader map than where the resettlement agencies are. So I want to end here on this a true story. I think the most, for me, important true story that I'm going to talk about today. So Oklahoma State University, when you all found out that Afghan evacuees were going to be coming to Oklahoma, leadership here reached out to locally and said, what can we do? What are the needs? And it was clear that housing was an immense need. And so OSU stepped up and provided 15 two-bedroom apartments. You all provided transportation support, English language training, employment, community support. Faculty, students, and staff stepped up. You coordinated the effort. You partnered with your local banks, with the DHS office, with local private agencies and private donors to really increase the positive outcome for integrations for Afghan evacuees hosted on your campus. It really shows that campuses like this, like Oklahoma State University and others, are really small cities with incredible facilities and resources and amenities. You also have curricular and co-curricular opportunities for students to engage in this work and to really align it with the work that you do with your students. And you are in a system where there are other agencies and partners that can help you do that work. This last slide is really just sort of a summary of what I've been saying about the resettlement campus. OSU is a brilliant example of that. A resettlement campus that supports refugee integration by offering housing and facilities and transforming your students' experience. And you're part of an ecosystem that has organizations, agencies that are all in your constellation, right, with you in many ways at that center. I don't know who's the Pope and who's Randy, but one of them is the Pope and one of them is Randy. So remember Ali, the man that I talked about at the beginning? Ali is an artist and a calligraphist. He was hosted on Guilford's campus for 8 months with his family. And when we went to see the Pope in September, we decided to take a plate made by Ali so that the Pope can hear about ECAR and know about ECAR. But it's such a beautiful moment of sort of a gift and a recognition of the inspiration and a testament to Ali's beautiful art. And this is Randy with his own plate. Randy actually made that plate, I think, under Ali's guidance.
Ali helped me make that plate.
Yes. It is very beautiful, yeah. I appreciate you all so much, and it's been a pleasure truly to be with you all. Is there time for some Q&A?
There is.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Diya. And I bought another thing from Ali as well, hanging in my office that I'm very proud of. We are at an hour, and I know that those online, we probably need to free them up. So if OSU, Inside OSU needs to give up, that's great. We'll take about 10 minutes if there are any questions. If you have a question, please wait till I get to you with the microphone so we can capture it for the video. So anybody have any? Okay, Campbell. Please introduce yourself.
Hi there, my name's Campbell Clark. I'm a student here at the School of Global Studies, and just want to thank you so much for coming. So my question for you is, in what way do you envision a successful management of these resettlement programs? Do you think it requires both local level community-based solutions as well as greater national level action?
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful question. So for the longest time, and that's why Welcome Corps is such a bold innovation, for the longest time, refugee resettlement has been very much a government federal issue, right? It's handled by the refugee resettlement agencies in partnership with the government, and it has been really kept out of the hands of the public, except, of course, in instances of community sponsorship or co-sponsorship or support. I think this new initiative, Welcome Corps, which allows community members to directly support and sponsor refugees, means that we're taking refugee resettlement and making it less a profession and less a professional issue and more a community issue. And why I think it's important to involve the community, absolutely, a lot more than has been the case, which is why Welcome Corps is so wonderful, is because when more community members participate in resettlement, the less mysterious and the less scary refugee resettlement becomes. The more of us engage directly, the more of us meet refugees, it becomes less political and less polarizing. And so I think it's crucial not only for us to increase refugee resettlement in this country, but I think it's crucial just politically so that we can depoliticize refugee resettlement and make it really a community issue and not a government or a political issue.
Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you for a really interesting and comprehensive presentation. You mentioned that only 1% of refugees are ever resettled. Mm-hmm. I thought that was a pretty shocking statistic. Mm-hmm. I had no idea. But and your presentation was kind of about the refugee experience in the United States. Yeah. So I'm thinking mainly in Europe now when I ask this question. But at what point, like, what's the definition that they become resettled? Is it when they get an apartment or do they... Yeah, just expand on that. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So resettlement means a pathway to citizenship. A pathway to citizenship. So there's, if you remember from the various experiences, there's local integration, and then there's de facto integration. Local integration means, like my family, They went to Jordan really as refugees. They lived in refugee camps, but over time, they were absorbed into the local community. We became Jordanian citizens. And so that's a positive local integration experience. De facto integration is when you can't go anywhere else, you can't move, you can't leave, you don't have paperwork, you don't have documents, but you're living in that country for generations. You don't have access, you don't have rights. That's not resettlement, that's not integration. So resettlement, like local integration, really means that you become part of the country, you become a citizen, as opposed to just living stateless for decades.
Thank you so much. I was struck by the statistics. I mean, when you say there are 27 million refugees, that's 5 times the population of Texas, 20 times the population of Oklahoma that are, I'm sorry, that's the internally displaced, right, the 100 million. And then just the refugees, that's about the population of Texas.
Yeah.
And so it's you know, if I were to really break that down into the 1%, it's truly frightening just what that means.
Yeah.
So I think that we'll take one more question, if there's one more question. I want to remind the School of Global Studies students, you will have an opportunity to meet with Dr. Abdo tomorrow morning. At what time is that, Jamie?
At 9.
9 a.m., okay.
Please be there. Thank you so much. My name is Rachel Farouk, and I'm just a townie. I'm very interested in your positive argument for integration. Do you expect to write at some point, or can you recommend authors who can speak to such successful integration that perhaps resettled folks are able to lead that effort themselves?
Yeah, so I think you've asked for resources, and I'm happy to, is that the first part of your question? Can you? Yes. Yeah, and happy to share resources. There's a lot of really great reports that come out of like RCUSA and other, the Center for Migration Studies, where they conduct surveys with refugees who have resettled here and really try to get at what is it that they needed and what is it that they still need to achieve successful integration. And what was the second part of your, so I'm happy to share resources, yeah.
If you plan to write about, or if you can recommend authors who have seen resettled individuals and families be able to be part of that effort.
Yes, yeah.
Or others arriving.
So thank you. And part of Blaze's story is that he has become a community helper. So he has seen his experience as a refugee, what that meant for him, not being able to, you know, because of some language barriers, be able to do well on an interview, or not having transportation to get to an interview. He understands those struggles and really wants to be part of supporting newly resettled refugees. What I've noticed is happening in Greensboro, where I live, is that a lot of the refugee supporting organizations are actually founded and led by refugees who have resettled in Greensboro. And what's happening at especially resettlement agencies is that case managers themselves are in Greensboro, almost all of them, formerly resettled refugees. So those are the folks who are working in spaces and understand intimately the experience and the needs of refugees. So I don't know that I am planning to write about it myself, but I am seeing you know, a lot of ethnic community-based organizations and other community-based organizations that are working with refugees that are led by former refugees.
So thank you again so much. We're so grateful for the work of ECAR, for your vision for creating this, for Pope Francis, for giving you the idea.
I know,
right?
yeah.
So it's an incredible honor to me to have my picture up there with him.
I know.
You know, one of the things we've learned through this experience is Oklahoma State University, like many universities, has a place of tremendous resources. We have intellectual resources, we have social resources, we have economic resources. And it's been such a fantastic opportunity. Moreover, it's a place of opportunity. Students come here because of the opportunities it creates. And it's just been an immense pleasure for us to participate with the local community, with the state, with the whole international movement to help bring new life. Emily and I spoke last week with the Rotary Club and reminded them that had those folks remained in Afghanistan, the women would not be able to work, the girls would not be able to go to school. And so this, the way in which colleges can create new pathways for opportunity is just immense. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you to Diya for being here. It's Privileged to have you on our campus. And thank you to all who have joined us online as well. Thank you very much.